Welcome to Hiraeth, the home of modern Welsh politics. It's nearly over. The roller coaster of events, the polar coaster of polls, and so many podcasts. And in a few more days, we can all have our lives back. With the overall result still looking as much of a certainty now as it did when the rain-soaked Rishi Sunak held his inevitably last press conference outside 10 Downing Street as Prime Minister on the 22nd of May, what are the uncertainties left to unpack and the last twists in the campaign to expect? We're joined by some friends of the pods to discuss this and what will be the final 32 results in the Welsh constituencies. We are joined by Sean Bendel, Third Sector Policy and Research Officer, and one of the founders of That's Devolved. Hello, Sean.
Thanks for having me back.
And Stephanie Whitehead, Policy Officer at Public Affairs Cymru. Hi, Steph.
Hi.
So with our Wales-focused lens, we've largely considered the election results to be settled in about 25, 26 or so of the 32 constituencies from pretty much the start of this election. Much of Wales will stay Labour red, but there are a few places left in doubt. Rich, I'm going to start with you. Your home constituency of Pontypridd. Now, there was a projection a couple of days ago saying that might turn Plaid Cymru. Now, what were your thoughts when you saw that?
I thought that was a very creative interpretation of the data. Young William Rees, I think, is standing for the first time for the constituency for Plaid Cymru. And I think he would probably write his name into the Plaid Cymru record books if he did indeed take it. So much as his campaign has been excellent, I'm sure, I suspect that we might see Pontypridd staying Labour red for the 160th year in the row, I think. I'm not sure. So yeah, I think let's not worry too much about Pontypridd. But who knows? Who knows? I could be eating my hat in just a few days' time, Matthew.
Anyone got any other comments on Pontypridd, or should we move on to some of the more actually interesting contests?
The one comment I'll make on it is I've been told that Mick Antoniou, obviously the MS for Pontypridd, plans to be in his office in the Senedd on the day. So I think if there were alarm bells going off in Pontypridd Labour HQ, Mick would not be allowed to go to Cardiff for the day.
That's a fair point, Rich. Sorry, you may have to deal with Labour red in your patch, for a little while. Okay, then. So another Plaid target, this one perhaps a little bit more realistically, is Caerfyrddin, the Carmarthenshire seat. Now, looking through all our predictions, that's mine, yours, Steph's, and Sean's. Pretty much everybody, but you, Rich, has that going to Plaid Cymru. Do you want to talk about why you think that's going to go Labour this time, and we'll talk a little bit why we think it's going to go Plaid?
I mean, it's a toss-up, as I think most people would probably think it's a toss-up. Prior to Jonathan Edwards confirming that he wasn't going to stand, I think people would feel more confident that it would be going Labour, because there would be an assumption that Jonathan Edwards would take, if nothing else, a few hundred, maybe 1,000 or more votes away from the Plaid Cymru candidate. Anne Davies, who's the candidate there, seems to be a very good local candidate for Plaid Cymru, has been working very, very hard. But the reason why I think it will probably go Labour is, one, because almost everything is going to go Labour in Wales, because the size of the Labour victory is going to be huge. But mostly, I think that having seen the sheer number of volunteers and big names going out there to campaign in Caerfyrddin over the last couple of weeks, once I think most people had assumed that almost all the other constituencies in Wales were going to go safely into the bag for the Labour Party, I think you've seen such a concerted effort in pushing the campaign out to the west there, that I think that probably will be enough to put it into the bag for Labour.
Steph, you've also got this going Plaid. Do you want to talk us a little bit through why you think that?
I think it's going to go to Plaid because obviously they won at the last election around that area. I think Llanelli has always been sort of Labour, but edging towards Plaid in some parts. But obviously that's a different constituency. But I think Carmarthenshire is sort of edging towards that part of Wales where people have that very strong Welsh identity that they want to protect, but also that there's this feeling among many constituencies that that traditionally may have voted Labour in the past, but are continuously continuing to vote for Plaid more often, feel like there's not as much ambition within Welsh Labour anymore, or that the Labour Party aren't really achieving the goals that many people want in terms of protecting the potential that Wales has. And Carmarthenshire's one of those areas that is quite often left out in a lot of things. And I think that there's the potential for Plaid to win there, because Plaid offer a sense of hope, I think, in terms of those ambitions becoming a reality.
Sean, what's your thoughts?
I very much agree with Rich that they'll have gone just the other way to Plaid, and that's just from speaking to a few people on the ground. I know Labour started pulling a lot of resources internally out of Swansea, for example, and sending that further west to Carmarthen. I think that you are sort of like in a very tight seat. This could be recount territory. I think that's kind of how close we're talking here. If it goes either way, it's going to be by a fine margin. I also agree with Rich that had Jonathan Edwards stood, then Labour would win it. But without him in the way, it's a little bit easier for Plaid. I think just speaking to people, I think it is tight, but maybe there's just a little bit of a factor that, we all know how unpopular Welsh Labour have been, especially with rural communities over the last year. And while there's a lot of people who lend Labour their vote in certain parts of Wales at general elections to keep the Tories from getting in, they feel they don't need to do that this time. Like, I think we're all agreed that Labour are going to run up a half-decent majority at least across the country. So what's the risk in voting Plaid for people down that way? And I wouldn't be surprised to see it go the other way. This is one of 2 or 3 seats where I'm like, it could go any way. Well, not any way. It could go one of 2 ways. But
I think in mentioning recount, I think one of the great bits of comments that we've had about this episode on the tweets today was, I can't remember who it was, but somebody said that there were 7 recounts for Carmarthen in 1974. That's pretty good going. I wonder if we might get anywhere near that kind of territory. Interesting times. Matthew, have you answered your own question yet?
No, I just wanted to mention that, of course, amongst the many wonderful people that have been going down to lend their support to Martha O'Neill in Carmarthen was Chris Bryant this morning, which you'll be glad to know. But no, I do actually think this will go Plaid, but just, I think from all the conversations we've had with people in the know down there, that this could be very much into recount territory. But something in my gut just tells me that that's going to be Plaid. I think the one really important thing to note in this constituency, which is this is notionally a Conservative seat from the 2019 election, and Simon Hart, who is the chief whip of the UK government, is almost certainly going to lose his seat, and that has almost just faded into insignificance in all the coverage. This is going to be a huge scalp for the Conservative Party, and it's sort of just accepted as gospel at the moment.
Although he's chief whip, he's not a front man of the government, and so I don't think it would be a classic Welsh version of a Portillo moment. Someone who's big in Wales but is completely anonymous to the rest of the UK loses seats, and people in Wales lose their stuff about it, but the rest of the UK just moves on without blinking. Really, I think that would be a classic moment.
I think we've got the potential for a couple of Portillo-style moments, so especially among the Welsh Tories, not to, write any new headlines that they're not going to do well. But I think you won't have anyone who's ever been Secretary of State for Wales winning a seat. So you're in that sort of territory, and that could be quite interesting.
Stop, skipping ahead in the script, Sean. Another interesting seat, and we're gonna go north now to Ynys Now, Rich, you have again predicted this going Labour, and I think the rest of us have got this going Plaid, apart from Kerry also thinks that it will go Labour. Is this a classic case of Plaid Cymru expectation management from you, Richard?
Matthew, it is as much a case of Plaid Cymru expectation management for me as it is for Labour expectation management for you, sir. I again, too close to call. I think you know, people who listen to the pod regularly may have heard my interview with Llynos Medi. Absolutely, you know, a cracking candidate. The only candidate I think Plaid Cymru could have picked that would have been as competitive as they have been on the island. She's already the council leader. She's been a councillor for a long time. She has quite an extraordinary life story. She left school at 16. She was homeless for a while whilst being a councillor. You know, these are things that give her a kind of lived experience on the island, which I think, you know, does have a reputation for being quite an independently minded place. However, you know, I again, it's flip of a coin for me. I think Ieuan Morn Williams, you know, commitment there, having a candidate with the name of the constituency in his name. I think that's a tremendous achievement. He's a very enthusiastic campaigner. I must confess, I'd never heard of him before this campaign. And you know, the Labour campaign machine has parked its I was going to say tanks, but maybe battle buses on Plaid's lawn there. And again, you know, I think it, you know, depends which ways the wind is blowing on Thursday. However, just as you quite rightly just said, Matthew, about Simon Hart, I think it's quite interesting that there is no conversation about Virginia Crosby, the current MP, holding it, and Ynys Môn dropping a sitting MP would be the first time that's happened, I think, in decades. So yeah, that would be interesting news. But again, I think it's probably leaning Labour, but it wouldn't surprise me if Llynos was able to take it for Plaid Cymru.
First since Megan Lloyd George, Richard, if that were to happen. Steph,
trivia.
You've got it going Plaid as well. Is it similar story to Carmarthenshire for you?
No, I think I kind of agree with Richard actually, because I think there was a part of me that thought, obviously, I think it was surprising to me that it became Conservative at the last election, particularly given the fact that Virginia Crosby is not from the area. And I always find that people sometimes will only vote for a candidate, particularly in a place like Ynys Môn, where it's very out of the way. They'll only vote for a candidate that has local connection. So it was surprising that did happen. But no, I think it might be quite a tight run up there between Plaid and Labour. But I think I would probably more likely go with Plaid, probably for similar reasons to Carmarthenshire, given that it is one of those places that's so out of the way. But I do agree as well, it's very independently minded, so it's a bit hard to guess, really.
Yeah, independently minded is something that came up in your interview with Llynos, wasn't it, Rich? That's definitely the way you describe the constituency. Sean, you're like me. You think this is going to go Plaid? Why?
Again, it is a bit of a coin toss there. I think I know Labour again, so they're diverting resource up there. They're obviously trying to run up a bit of a cricket score, aren't they, in terms of winning places you don't necessarily expect them to. Again, surprising that they're going to drop a Conservative, well, the current sitting MP, who is the Conservative candidate. Very unusual, as you said, especially given that just, you know, the couple of days before the election was called, they promised a good bit of investment in the nuclear energy industry up there. But I think Plaid of a good candidate. And again, this is one of those seats, one of the few seats I'm not sure of, but I think it's just speaking to people and not as good an insight as down in Carmarthen, but probably just Plaid. And I also think Rhys ap Iorwerth has been very good when he's been in the media lately, also being the local MS, and I think that will count in their favour as well, that he's put in a good shift in the media and maybe just be enough to carry them across the line in his home patch.
There's one thing that really sticks in my mind when thinking about how Ynys Môn will vote. And it goes back a couple of weeks to one of the big YouGov MRPs, where they started to take in Welsh language as a demographic factor. And as soon as they did that, you did see a big switch in that Caerfyrddin and Ynys Môn constituencies in favour of Plaid. And obviously that's going to be a massive issue and a massive voting factor for people in Carmarthenshire and in Ynysmore. And for me, on that basis, given it is so close to call, I think Plaid will just win. You're talking, again, either recount territory or within 1,000 or so votes. It's going to be really, really close in Ynysmore.
Can I just say, though, I do think that there is an extra enthusiasm in the Labour Party for beating the Plaid Cymru in those 2 seats than maybe some of the other Conservative held seats. There's a specific pleasure reserved for beating the Nats in some constituencies where it's a Plaid Labour marginal, and I think it will be a very interesting. Whichever way those 2 seats go, I think it'll be a very interesting further conversation, but bit of dialogue between the parties about who represents Wales. Because I think if Plaid Cymru does go down to 2 seats, which is arguably quite a likely outcome, I think that will essentially make them invisible in the Commons. But if they have 4, I think that would, that could give them a slightly more weighty voice against the gigantic 200-seat Labour majority. I think it'd be quite interesting.
Right. So it is a great shame that we are not joined by our colleague from Powys for the next 2 seats. But we're going to take on another one of Wales's wonderful 3-way marginals, and we're going to talk about Brecon, Radnor and Cwm Tawe. Now, Kerry, Steph and Sean have all said that this will be a Conservative held seat. Steph, why do you think the Tories will hold on in Brecon, Radnor and Cwm Tawe?
I think they may just hold on because, of course, they are in that area where there is some influence of the Lib Dems to kind of come in, and people might vote Lib Dem because I think they're more trusting of the Lib Dems than the Conservatives at the moment. And I think just generally, just in the border areas, I mean, I'm from the border areas, and it seems more and more that we're seeing that kind of switch to the Lib Dems anyway. But I think they'll hold on because, of course, it's been that way. It's been Conservative for a very long time. It's James Evans, who's the MS. He's very popular. He, comes from a farming background. I think he really hits with a lot of people with regards to farming, particularly given Welsh Labour's stance on farming at the moment, and that might then carry across into the vote at the general election as well. I think having that Conservative voice on both sides with regards to farming, given that its biggest economy is farming, I think it may just about remain as a Conservative voting area.
Sean?
My logic behind it is I think Labour have probably thrown slightly too much at this seat to get the Tories out. I think if this came down to a purely Labour, obviously standard candidate, but treated it as Lib Dems at Chios, have a free run at it, then Lib Dems would do it. But I think Labour, a couple of weeks ago, smelled a little bit of blood in the water, especially in the southern parts of the constituency. Had a little go to see what's going on there. We are talking Labour majorities. They're looking for a very big majority. They're in the situation where they're ready to use a football and actually send their goalkeeper up to take the penalty when they're already 5-0 up. It's that kind of territory we're in. So I think that probably means that Labour Lib Dem vote just a little bit too split to let the Lib Dems beat the Tories. Again, I wouldn't be surprised if the Lib Dems come through, and I think that's what Steph thinks as well.
Yeah.
But I think it comes down to those sort of factors. It's a little bit Tory leaning, and I think Welsh Labour's upset the farmers perhaps a little bit too much to really be that popular there, but probably not upset them enough to leave the Lib Dems come through.
Rich, for once, me and you completely agree on this, don't we? We think it's going to just be a Lib Dem win.
Well, I think all of what, particularly what Sean just said about Labour maybe having pushed a little bit too hard. They've got a pretty good candidate, I think, in BRCT, but I think maybe they have pushed a little bit too hard, and this pact the unspoken pact about, non-aggression pact between Labour and Lib Dems, which seems to be working so well across the border, east of the border. Maybe it just started to fray a little bit, but certainly from the whispers on the grapevine, it was only about 2 weeks ago that, as I said earlier, that the energetic campaign sort of drifted westwards towards Caerfyrddin from the Labour Party, which meant that maybe there's a more gentle peddling going on in BRCT. But, I suppose I am probably Lib Dem optimist. We did a nice interview with William Powell, who's standing in Monmouthshire earlier in the week. I think if William had stood there, I think it would have probably been definitely a loss, because he's old school liberal, country liberal, and I just don't think there's an appetite for that kind of person to be elected anymore in anywhere really, but certainly not in places like Powys. I think David Chadwick, I know that there are some people who like to tease him about being a parachutist in the constituency, but he's been there for a long time. He was selected early and has worked the seat really, really hard. And so I think, he stands probably as good a chance as a Liberal stands anywhere in Wales. And I think, those roots do go quite deep. So I think that he might just put it in the bag, but it is going to be close. How about you, Matt?
Yeah, no, I think it's inevitably going to be one of the closest races of the night. I think, like yourself and Sean have said, Labour have been pushing very hard at that seat for a good few weeks now. They obviously think there is a decent vote share to be found there. But I go back to two things. One, that area is very good at voting tactically. I went on an Operation Sodit, Save Our Deposit, at the by-election there a few years ago for the Labour Party. And people there, even if they're naturally Labour, will tend to vote Lib Dem if there's a chance of getting the Conservatives out. That, I think, will probably stay true this time round, especially given the number of polls that show the Lib Dems edging closer there, especially because of all the tactical voting sites that say the Lib Dems are the choice to get rid of the Tories. But also, my second major point is, if you go back to that by-election in 2019, something that really hurt the Conservatives in that patch was the strength of the Brexit Party vote. And I think you see the Reform Party polling so high in Wales in this election that the top line figure for a lot of these Conservatives that otherwise would feel like they could hold on is being damaged so much by Reform that they are really going to struggle. So don't get me wrong, I don't think it's going to be the case of the Conservatives coming third, but I do think their overall vote percentage in places like Brecon, Radnor, Cwm Tawyd will take an almighty hit, and that will just allow the Lib Dems to squeeze through.
That's a good point, well made, I think, and that's certainly going to be the case all across Wales, and maybe is why we're not talking so much about any Tory holds in places like Pembrokeshire or in Ynys Môn or elsewhere, because their vote share is being eaten at both ends. It's really difficult for them. I was just say, are we going to give a shout out though to Faye Jones, who was the sitting MP, of course, over in Brecon, who was a founder panelist on our first ever podcast. So, whatever the result, we wish her best for what is to come.
Absolutely. Shall we go to the other Powys seat? Kerry, bless him. It took a lot of convincing, but eventually did change his prediction to a Labour victory in Montgomeryshire. Now, again, context here, that would be the first time ever that Labour has won Montgomeryshire at a parliamentary election. If you think about over a century of political dominance in Wales, and they've never won that seat, it would be quite a groundbreaking result, wouldn't it, Sean?
It would be. A little bit of behind-the-scenes information. Matt asked me for my predictions last weekend before Craig Williams was dropped and endorsed as the Conservative candidate, and I said he was staying Tory. And I messaged him earlier today asking would he undo his hard work he'd already done drawing them out for me and change it to say that Labour were going to win. And I do think that's what it's come down to in the end. I think if he was still backed as the Tory candidate, Labour would get close, but not win it. But I think now, without backing behind him, over the betting scandals and everything that's gone on there, Labour will probably just about do it. I did speak with a Lib Dem friend of mine, because obviously we will just discuss how it's more generally being quite a Lib Dem area, and they're not really interested in it. They know it's too out of range for them completely. So very much, if Labour aren't going to do it now, then when? And I think it's just the night for it.
Rich?
The reform stuff is obviously eating away at the Conservative vote. Labour are particularly strong. But the key thing, I think, in that seat, not just the slight boundary change, but also the fact that the Lib Dems were terrible setting up that seat. Now, they've got a good local candidate. I think he's a councillor up there, Glyn Preston. But he wasn't selected until really, really late in the day. And if you compare his profile in the constituency versus David Chadwick in Brecon Radnor and Cwm Tower, it's really, really low. And there was just a sense that the Lib Dems didn't have their act together in a seat where they would have otherwise been thought of as the contender. So one of the reasons why Labour are looking so competitive, on top of the insanity and stupidity of Craig Williams, is the fact that the Lib Dems just didn't get their act together in good time. And, only they will know why that was. But even after the election was called, I don't think that they had their candidate chosen until a week or so after the election was called, which is ridiculous given that how long we've known that an election was in the works anyway. So, again, it's a case of there's something really quite extraordinary might happen there, but there are very good reasons why the conditions are right for that to happen this year.
Weirdly, I kind of feel that if it had only been Craig caught up in this betting gate, he might have been more okay than he is now, because it almost would have sort of faded into the background. But because there is this constant flow of new information coming forward about different cases, it sort of kept it in the news and put that pressure upon the Conservative Party to withdraw their support for his candidacy. But the impact of that withdrawal is going to be significant. I think he's not going to have access to the finances for online digital spend. He's not going to have access to campaign literature. I don't know how much resource they'll give him they're not going to give him any resource on the day now, so I don't know how much otherwise he'll have for getting the vote out. What kind of infrastructure has he got around him for the count itself? Because if it's a really tight election, you're going to want really good people around you for the count in case you need to ask for recounts and do all your checking and things like that. It's going to be really difficult for him on the day.
And with a politician, name recognition is what you need to win in tight elections. And if your name is only being recognised because you're involved in a scandal related to the outcome of the election, that's going to work the other way. And it's exactly what you said, Matt. It's if it was just one person making a stupid mistake, fine, but it's what they call a pattern behaviour in policing circles. The Conservative, clearly there was a whole group of people who thought this kind of thing was acceptable, which the public more widely don't.
And it's probably worth noting as well, it's not just Craig Williams necessarily being caught up. It's been a bit broader, especially in that area, that this has been an issue. And I think, Matt, you're completely right. It's a bit of almost a stereotype that the Tories are very good at phone banking, as opposed to Labour is very good at knocking doors. And, well, I don't think you can do much phone banking by yourself, can you? Otherwise, how is he going to get any vote out?
Steph, so you disagree with us here. You have been saying that this will stay Conservative.
Yeah, I don't know, actually. Now listening to what you've all said, I think if it does go to Labour, it wouldn't be surprising. And I think especially given what's happened with Craig Williams, I think that's the thing, is not only has it just brought up the fact that he's done this and it looks untrustworthy, but it's also brought his name out into the media. And I think when people look him up, they'll realise that he's been an MP before, I believe, in Cardiff. So it's a bit like, can you really have somebody that's been an MP in one place coming to an area very different? Is that really reflective of what people want in an MP? Is somebody that just jumps from place to place? So if it went to Labour, that wouldn't surprise me. But yeah, it seems like Craig Williams is kind of like the huge factor in that potentially happening.
One thing I think is important to note, though, just in case we're all horrifically wrong and he does win on the 9th, is that the timing of the withdrawal of support, I think, is critical. So they withdrew support after the postal votes went out. So a significant number of people will have seen Craig Williams' name, Conservative candidate, in their postal vote before they had withdrawn support, and very likely would have voted for him. Also on the ballot, he will appear as Craig Williams' Conservative Party candidate. So people who don't pay as much attention as us nerds will just turn up, vote the way they normally do, and see Conservative candidate and vote for him.
What was sorry, Matt, what was the timing of the kind of, what was the timing between the postal votes coming, but then also the press releases about what happened and then his withdrawal as a candidate? Because I feel like if the postal votes hadn't quite gone out yet, then there might be some Conservative voters that might think, actually, I don't want a candidate like that, so they'll vote for the next best thing, which will probably be the Lib Dems at that point. I mean, this is a really wild guess, but you know, it could happen. It could help the Lib Dems, but I don't think that they would win in that area.
It's an interesting question. From my brain's timeline of this is basically the allegations came out, the postal votes dropped, and then he was suspended. And I think there was about a 2-week gap between the allegations arising and then the suspension of his the dropping of support for his candidacy. So there is a not small chance that a significant amount of people still voted for him because they weren't paying as much attention as us. So whilst we're all saying we think it'll go Labour now because of all the very many practical reasons that happened in the last week of a campaign, it wouldn't absolutely shock me if he held on. Rich?
Can I just say how academic this is, though? Because if he does, by some miracle, hang on to the seat, he'll face a recall petition almost instantly as soon as the House of Commons sits again, and he's going to lose the seat when that recall petition goes through. So, you know, even if it is a brief Conservative victory in Montgomeryshire and Glyndŵr, you know, it's not going to last. So I almost think it would almost be a mercy killing for him to lose the seat in this election.
We have one more seat to go before we move on to our other bits of predictions. But we're going to look at Monmouthshire. Now, Rich, at the beginning of the campaign, you thought this was going to stay blue, didn't you? But now you think it's going to be Labour.
You know, like all of these, I think it's still close. If the rumours of Conservative campaign groups are to be believed, Monmouthshire is the one seat in Wales that they are really trying to hold on to. It's the only seat that is held by, you know, a cabinet secretary in Wales, and you know, you can understand why they would want to hold on to that seat. That seat, I can't remember exactly. I think it's been held by the Conservatives for 96 of the last 106 years or something along those lines. You know, it is as Conservative a seat as it can be in Wales. And it's nevertheless going to be close. However, all of the factors that we've talked about so far, I don't think, you know, will have basically squeezed the Conservative vote. Labour have really put a lot of effort in there. I think they launched their election campaign in Wales in Monmouthshire as well. And, you know, I think also David T.C. Davies has not had a great campaign in terms of, you know, being the front man for the party in Wales. I've changed my mind over the course of the campaign. I think what was a close race with a Tory hold is now going to be a close race with a Labour gain in Monmouthshire.
Steph, what's your thoughts on Monmouthshire?
I think it could potentially go Lib Dem. I think it's in the right area for it to head towards the Lib Dems. I think it's, you know, again, it's a border area. I'm just also speaking from experience, being from an area that's very similar to Monmouthshire, that was a Tory safe seat for hundreds of years, and then had a by-election and turned Lib Dem, So I don't know. I think it might potentially go to Lib Dems, but I think David TC Davis, he's always struck me as a bit of a controversial figure. He's not that likable by people in Monmouthshire, but I think because of the fact that it's in that part of Wales where it's still rural enough for people to vote Conservative, people still vote for him on the basis that he is Conservative. But I think now, given the fact that a lot of people are very skeptical of the Conservatives, there's the potential for it to go to the Lib Dems. But I feel free to disagree.
Sean?
Yeah, I think Labour will gain this. I think Kath Fuchs is a good candidate. She has the potential to sort of be Officer Dibble and chase off Top Cat. I think that's a really bad joke. Yeah,
that's a deep cut. That's a Saturday morning spent in front of Cartoon Network. That is, Sean.
That is. I think Labour have in recent years done better in that seat. Obviously, they roughly took control of the council just about at the last local elections. Kath has been working that seat for a long time now. She was a council candidate. She became a cabinet member. She got selected and then took a step back from that and has been fighting this election for well over a year now. I think in terms of the new candidate standing for Labour, she's one of the ones that I think has something more about them, something to say, given her professional experience in the third sector in Wales. And I just think that is the one that Labour have thrown a lot at, to take that and the Vale of Glamorgan being the two that they really wanted to make sure they got. And I think they have put a lot of effort into turning that seat. I don't think it'll be a huge majority, but I think Kath will take it just about.
We asked our followers on social media today for some of their bold predictions. So obviously you mentioned the 7 recounts in 74 in Carmarthenshire, another fantastic stat. Welsh Politics Out of Context has said that Plaid will win Caerfyrddin and Ysmôn and come second in Llanelli and Blaenau Gwent. Interestingly, has predicted Reform to win Caerphilly. Don't see that happening myself. And also says that the Greens will be the Lib Dems in Monmouthshire. Lloyd Warburton, former guest on the pod, has said the Lib Dems will win Brecon, Radnor and Cwmtawe. Labour will win Montgomeryshire, but it will be a 4-way dead heat between the Conservatives, Lib Dems and Plaid. Friend of the pod, Bob Lloyd, predicted that the Greens will keep a deposit. I'm sure Kerry would have found that very funny. So Radek has said that the Greens will finish second in Cardiff South. Very interesting prediction. I don't think that would happen. And then Josh Owen Morris said that Plaid will win Bangor Aberconwy. Maybe they're also working on the Welsh language factor. Aberconwy has been a Plaid seat in the past in the Senedd. It's also a 3-way marginal at a Senedd level, but I just don't see that happening this time round myself. We've also had a few secret messages from people. One very interesting from a well-informed source, that they think that David TC Davis will win Monmouth by fewer than 100 votes. Interesting. Keep an eye on that one. And then one more that came to me via text, that the Vale will be a closer result than Monmouthshire. Ponty will be closer than everyone expects, and that Reform will come second in a number of seats across Wales.
I don't think it's a hot take to say Reform will come second in Wales at this point.
Do you think they'll come second overall? I kind of still think that the Conservatives will just pick them in Wales.
I think they're both in that sort of 16 to 20% bracket, and it would not surprise me at all to see Reform come second in Wales. I think they are doing nowhere near winning anything, but doing well in the way that UKIP and the Brexit Party have in the past in some valley seats, especially M4 corridor.
Steph, do you think that Reform are going to come second?
Oh, I don't know. I've always thought that they still kind of tail off towards the end, but they seem to be growing in popularity very, very quickly, particularly given the fact that I think Nigel Farage has appeared on the scene again and is a very popular figure among people. So it may be, it's difficult because for me, I always see Wales is quite traditional in terms of the way it votes, and I think I'm not entirely convinced that that reform would come second, just because of that, really.
I've got a horrible bit of gossip that's going to put a chill down everybody's spine. I've heard that if Nigel Farage does not win in Clacton, he will be putting himself nicely at the top of one of the new Senedd constituencies. So if we don't have Nigel Farage MP, there's a very good chance we'll have Nigel Farage MS in 2 years' time. What do you think the turnout will be?
Well, it's a change election, to coin a terribly common phrase these days. I think it's going to be quite high. You know, people are motivated to change in the places where there are higher concentrations of population in Wales. I think it's going to be, and you know, I think it's going to be quite high. I don't think we're going to set any records, because I think unfortunately for the Conservatives, I think one of the things that we'll see, rather like in 1997, is more that the Conservative voting population in Wales will probably more likely stay at home than switch, although how many of those would go to Reform, I don't know. Although we don't know what's going to happen with the new voter ID regulations and stuff. It's not been tested in Wales in the same way that it has in England with the local council elections and the mayoralties and stuff. So we don't know what the effect that will be.
Steph, turnout?
I think it will be quite high as well. Again, not breaking any records, but I think that's just going to be the case across the UK, not just in Wales. I think that, people are quite tired of having the Conservatives. They want to see something different. And I think there's lots of issues as well that are kind of coming to the forefront that people will want to vote on, and they will want to have someone in Westminster that will represent them on those issues, because I think there's been a lot of issues that have been left dormant that have now kind of come back to the forefront now that we've got an election. I also think that sort of electoral fatigue that people had from the past couple of years has gone now. And I think we've waited, obviously, 5 years, but we've waited long enough, and I think people probably will feel like they're ready again now to have their voice heard on something.
Sean, the general election turnout for 2019 in that bleak midwinter was 64%. You're saying it'll be slightly higher this time?
Just a little bit. I think people don't like voting. I've sort of come to this conclusion. They generally just don't enjoy it. I also just think that if you tell people enough times that something's going to happen, they just think, oh, well, you kind of get it the other way. You get apathy of they're either content that Labour are going to run up a great big majority and aren't so infused. There's not so much riding on it, as opposed to maybe, say, 2017, where it was seen as quite a tight election, where there was, every vote did count in a slightly different way. Whereas I think this time you'll get a fairly average sort of turnout, that people they'll vote. How enthusiastic, I think, varies. I think the tone of my voice is giving me away, but I think I'm not expecting a huge groundbreaking turnout, but a decent one.
I'm going to be really grumpy and disagree with you all. I would say the highest we'll see it is 62%. I would actually, on gut, think it'll be a bit lower than that, but I'll be optimistic for the sake of all your smiley faces and say 62%. We've got one final thing to discuss, and that is the campaign as a whole, and we're going to try and condense that into 3 minutes. But we want to hear your thoughts on who the big winners and losers of the campaign were. And Rich, do you want to start us off?
Yep, I'll try and be super quick. I mean, the winners are obviously UK Labour. The now incredibly tediously named Ming Vase strategy appears to be paying off. They're set for a big victory. I think in the Welsh context, we mentioned him before, Nigel Farage and the Reform Party have, by launching in Wales, really kind of re-announced their intent here. They did really well in previous European elections, in previous guises, and in 2016 in the Senedd election. And I think ultimately they have already won a few seats in the next Senedd election just by being such a big presence here. And I would also say, I think Hiraeth General has had a good election. He's done a very, very capable job on screens, big and large, big and small, on social media and broadcast media for Plaid Cymru, and I think has actually surprised an awful lot of people about how well he has performed in the territory. Losers, obviously, the Conservative Party, not least because of the Craig Williams stuff. I think they're probably going to face a wipeout in Wales or a near wipeout. I'm also going to slightly controversially, and I can feel myself getting slightly defensive before I say this, but I think it is true. I think the Welsh Labour Senedd group are the losers of this election because I think over the last 14 years, they have been the most parliamentary successful Labour politicians anywhere in the UK, and arguably have had the most senior Labour elected politician in the UK in the First Ministership. And I think what we have seen, certainly in the case of the manifesto writing process and the subsequent announcements, is every single pretense of power or influence that they might have had over their UK party colleagues disappear incredibly quickly. So much so that it was almost comical watching the new First Minister's personal leadership manifesto being deflated quickly by various people across the way. And also, I would say, again, slightly, I fear that people will be unhappy with me saying this, but I also have to say that I think future Secretary of State for Wales, Jo Stevens, has had a particularly rotten campaign because she's had to defend some pretty indefensible positions, including against her own position from a couple of years ago on things like HS2. And I think her credibility in the domestic media in Wales and in the minds of people who might be on that classic Welsh Labour soft nationalist wing are probably turned against her. So, sorry, it was not as brief as I hoped to be there, but those are my winners and losers.
Anyone got anything to add to that very comprehensive list?
I think I just want to really agree with Rich both on Hiraeth General, as I mentioned earlier. I think it's run a really good campaign. Vaughan Gethin has not come out well from this. He came into the election badly and has really just been, you think about in the past where the face of Welsh Labour at these elections, especially in recent years, has been using the First Minister, be it Carwyn or be it Mark, to save face in Wales. Vaughan has not been sent out. Jo Stevens has been doing that job, and even Nick Thomas-Symonds sent out to some of the debates. There was a rumour they were going to get Carwyn out at one point to do some work for them. So I think you're very much right. As somebody who is on the soft nationalist wing of the Welsh Labour Party, I think the winners are anybody who enjoys Labour infighting, because this will just continue that. But yeah, I think you've seen a little bit of a blow for the clear red water strategy of recent years in this election.
Steph?
Yeah, I would agree. I think that given what's happened most recently with Vaughan, I think people have lost a lot of trust. And I think when we're talking about Plaid as well, with what I said at the beginning around, people are kind of who have previously voted Labour now feeling, who are on that sort of soft nationalist side now voting potentially for Plaid. I think it's what's happened with Vaughan has sealed the deal around, Labour just not taking Wales seriously enough or not being ambitious enough. So I think, it will play out more for Plaid, I think, but it will still remain predominantly Labour, because I think people like to stick to their guns, I think, in Wales sometimes.
Matthew?
The big winner is unfortunately first past the post. Another landslide victory means the chances of us ever getting rid of this disastrously stupid electoral system is delayed for another 5 years. I don't like saying losers, but I think someone who potentially could have performed slightly better during this campaign was Liz Saville Roberts. the Plaid Cymru Westminster leader, who had a couple of bad debates and hasn't been able to make as much of an impact as other leaders. I think really the only reason we consider her, though, in this sort of negative space is just because of just how well Reen has done. And I think that's the only thing I can really say in addition to that. So that's your lot. That has been Hiraeth's coverage of the 2024 general election campaign. I would like to thank, as always, our producer extraordinaire, Richard Martin, and thank Sean and Steph for coming on and speaking with us this evening. If people want to hear more from you on social media, where can they go? Sean?
I'm the person keeping the cogs running behind the That's Devolved.
Steph, what about you?
So if you want to hear more from me, the best place to follow would probably be the Pac Cymru X account.
Fab. Well, thank you very much, both of you. Thank you to all our listeners throughout this, what has felt like never-ending general election campaign. If you would like to hear more from Hiraeth, you can go and find us on all the socials at Hiraeth Pod. You can go to our website, www.walespolitics.com, and thank you for supporting us with your ears. But if you would like to do so with your wallet, you can go to www.patreon.com/Hiraeth Pod. Thank you for listening to Hiraeth. If you like what you heard, please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review.